Hey Tony, it's Tuesday, and first off, to answer your question of the week, I think my favorite villain trope is probably the villains who are the hero of their own story, or even the villains who you can look at from like an objective point of view and go, no, you actually are probably in the right here. I think actually a pretty good example of that one is Ozymandias from Watchmen. Now, Ozymandias, what he does is a terrible, terrible thing. At the same point, you can kind of like you can kind of sit there and go, okay, sure, you just killed millions, maybe not millions, but you just killed hundreds of thousands, but you also stopped nuclear war, so you can kind of understand where he could be the hero in a different story if your protagonists weren't Rorschach and Night Owl. So I think that's a good question. I think villain tropes that can be played with are really fun. So I was talking about this week is actually a couple of little updates about the podcast I'm doing with my friend. So, talk about previously, it's the Gilded Age. My friend and I have decided that we're going to be doing it together, and what we're going to end up doing is we're going to do it almost like a BuzzFeed Unsolved way, in which like I'm going to do, like a lesson plan, and like more or less do like in like a class, and my friend will be asking questions throughout the whole time. So I think it's going to be a pretty neat interplay. And I already drafted up. Well, I've drafted up the preview. I've drafted up my first lesson plan, and I'm in the middle of my second lesson plan. It was kind of funny. One of my colleagues who I work with, one of my friends who I work with, ended up saying that kind of laughed when I was telling her about this, and she said, "Oh, is this your dry run to finally be a professor?" Which I kind of laughed at because, like in a way, it kind of will be. But instead of like educating a class, I'll be educating for whoever wants to listen, and I think it's gonna be fun. Drafted up, like the first lesson is basically just like what was the Gilded Age, or let's rephrase, what was the Gilded Age, and I kind of like go through of like, okay, well, so here's some of what it was. Here's how it got its name. Here's when it started. Here's when it ended. Here's some historical debate as to what is what, and here's some historical debate of like, oh, was it actually 1865 to 1930? Was it 1870 to 1899? And like how do you kind of just distill it down to being a good product and a good lesson. And so I'm kind of really excited about that. And I started drafting episode 2, which then turned into I didn't finish episode 2, but I'm like, okay, this next episode is going to require at least three full episodes because there's so much going on in this. So it's going to kind of be interesting, in which the the first several episodes aren't even going to be about the Gilded Age in the first place, because like the episode 1 is like, okay, a basic overview of what the era was. The next episode is the lead up to the Civil War. The episode after that is going to be the Civil War itself, and then currently my idea for for episode 4 is talk about just the year 1865, because I think that's going to be. I mean, that year itself was wild. Lincoln became the first president assassinated. The Confederacy surrendered. Like Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in Appomattox, and so many other events kind of dispersed from there that really set the stage for the entire Reconstruction era, and then further the entire what I really believe to be the Gilded Age. Which I think is from 1865 to 1901. Now, obviously, there's considerable debate on that. In fact, there are a couple there's actually a good podcast I listened to that had two actual historians talking about what they consider the time period. So I think that's going to be fun. So I guess my question for you, Tony, is: are there any ideas you have for neat little podcasts or neat little lesson plans? I know you were really into history for a while. I didn't know if there'd ever be a time where you wanted to do like a history podcast or something. So Tony, I will see you on Friday. Later, bro.